Imagine if you got the cash ETF approved and you had participants like BlackRock and Fidelity coming in with their selling machines, selling the idea of Bitcoin to their investors.
And then something like that.
It would have fortified the base of those frauds. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's just luck on Gensler's part, but it did help. The irony of what I'm saying to you, Jackie, is it did help the industry.
Hey everyone, welcome to Talking Tokens, a podcast focused on interviewing the best crypto founders, market players, and up-and-coming startups that are changing the industry every single Tuesday and Thursday. I'm Jacquelyn Melinek, your award-nominated host and former senior crypto reporter turned entrepreneur, and I'm excited to be here with you all. Now, let's get into it. Today's guest is Anthony Scaramucci, the founder and managing partner of SkyBridge Capital and a founder and chairman of SALT. He has an extensive career across the entrepreneur world, the finance world, and he's also in the crypto space.
Jackie, is that what you're doing? I've had an extensive career.
He has a very great career.
Trying to let people know that my career is as old as your birthday.
Yeah, probably.
It's okay.
Maybe. Hey, now you're making me sound old. Anyways, Anthony.
Oh my God, that was even a bigger cut.
Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
I was going to start by asking you about your career. I'm not trying to start anything. You know, you worked at Goldman. You have your own, asset management firm. You were briefly at the White House, and you're in the crypto space. What brought you into this industry, since this podcast is focused on crypto, and kind of walk us through all of that?
I've had two great firings in my career. So let's go there. I think those are interesting for people. So I started at Goldman on August 14th, 35 years ago. At this point, you could tell me your age or you don't have to.
I'm younger than 35.
Yes, I knew you were. I knew you were. So I know that was another shot at me. Okay, so anyway.
Before my time,
August 14th, 1989, I started at the little picture, look at the ID. I got fired from Goldman on February 1st, 1990. So I was at the firm for about 18 months. I was in the real estate department and investment banking. I was terrible at that job. We actually have the 35th anniversary reunion of my training class, which is coming up in November. So I was in the real estate department. So as luck would have it, I met Donald Trump for the first time when I was 25 years old in that real estate department. So that's also worked out really well for me too. We can talk about that later. But I got fired. And then luck would have it, I got rehired into Goldman. So if you look at my resume, it looks like I spent 7 years at Goldman, but there was a firing in that period.
I'm surprised they let you come back after they fired you.
I was just another division, and I did well in that other division, and I left and started my own company at age 32. I sold that company to Neuberger Berman. Neuberger Berman got bought by Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers, of course, the biggest still to this day, 16 years later, the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history. But I left Lehman to start SkyBridge in 2005 before they went bankrupt in 2008. So anyway, make a long story short, I've been at SkyBridge 19 years. But my ill-fated time in the White House was based on things that I was doing in politics. I was always a political fundraiser. I found that was a way to meet people that I needed to meet to grow my business. I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood, so I wasn't a country club sort of a kid. And that was an entree into meeting interesting and very successful people. So as Jeb Bush has once said to me, if I won the presidency, you would have never even been anywhere near the White House, not even at a Christmas party, which I think is sort of funny.
Jeb Bush would have won, though.
Yeah, no. But, look, Trump won. He wanted me to be the comms director. I got my ego involved. I went in to be the comms director. My second influential firing, was 7 years ago. But, my two things happened to me in the White House, which I think are worth noting. The first thing was the Fed had written a white paper back in July of 2017. You go back and find it, about the potentiality of digitizing the US dollar, having a central bank digital currency. And that was incredibly enlightening to me. There was an epiphany for me because I was a blockchain skeptic. I was introduced to Bitcoin just shows you my lack of intelligence. I was introduced to Bitcoin by the twins. The Winklevoss twins came to one of my conferences in 2014, and they introduced me to Bitcoin. I didn't understand it. I walked away from it. Peter Diamandis, I mean, to really get you going in Bitcoin lore, in September of 2014, he introduced me to a gentleman by the name of Hal Finney. And Hal Finney, of course, was the first recipient of a token, a transfer of a token from a Satoshi wallet. And of course, he did a great job explaining what Bitcoin was and what it could be. And again, I wasn't focused on it because I was the garden variety Wall Street institutional investor. Right. So the big epiphany was the Fed was talking about using the blockchain. I said, okay, I got to get up to speed on the blockchain. And then the second thing that happened, which I also think influenced me going into Bitcoin, was we were discussing various sanctions. You may or may not remember this, but President Trump signed into law. He didn't really like doing this, but he signed into law the Russian sanctions bill in late July of 2017. And that bill restricted the Russians in a lot of different ways related to the use of the US dollar. And we've weaponized the US dollar, again, rightly or wrongly from a political perspective. And one thing that Bitcoin provides is a little bit more of a libertarian bent on doing transactions. So when I was fired and returned to my job back at SkyBridge, I guess one of the best things about getting fired from the White House, if you have your own business, you just go back to your business and mind your own business. Right. So I went back and I started a Bitcoin fund because remember the SEC said you couldn't have a ETF. We filed for an ETF. Our ETF application alongside of Fidelity and others was rejected. We decided not to refile because we didn't think we could compete with behemoths like BlackRock, eventually Fidelity. But I thought if I had gotten that ETF up and running in 2020 or 21, it would have been successful.
4 years too early, yeah.
Yeah, early. We were early, but we own a lot of Bitcoin. We got a lot of Bitcoin in the 2020 timeframe. So I guess we're coming up on our 4th year anniversary of holding Bitcoin. We own other assets as well. But so my career is a series of adaptations, a series of things, you know, the adage that you're planning your life and God's laughing, that's my career. And so if you had said to me when I left law school 35 years ago that I would be a 60-year-old Bitcoiner, I'd say, okay, that's probably not going to happen, but that's where we are.
Well, Bitcoin didn't even exist then.
It didn't exist. And given the fact that I had worked for a very large 100-plus-year-old institution, I think Goldman is now 155 years old, but it was 120 years old when I started there. Very in the sediment, if you will, of institutional investing with all of the layers of scrutiny that comes with. Bitcoin is a little bit more of a speculative investment and a little bit more of a reach, even especially for people my age, frankly.
Yeah, I think I resonate a lot with what you're saying about like when you graduated from school, did you really think you'd be doing this? And I always, talk to people my age and around me in the space where it's like, you don't really need to have the same career your whole life. Like I felt like in my dad's era, he kept the same career, was in banking his whole life. And he was at the same company, for like 15 years at a time or something. And like now people in my age and even in this industry, they just like flip flop around all the time. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Maybe you should hold on. But anyways, we actually met before we started recording. We talked about how we met initially at an event called Crypto Bahamas back in 2022. You're nodding. Yes. It was actually a really amazing event.
Look, let's be very candid. This was an event that was a SkyBridge sponsored, a SALT sponsored event with Sam Bankman-Fried. Yeah. The infamous hedge fund cryptocurrency entrepreneur is now serving a 25-year sentence in jail for fraud. The reason I'm smiling is that was, and that should have been an indication to both of us, Jackie, that we were at the top of the market, okay? Because that was arguably one of the best events I'd ever attended. I'd be remiss in not saying that to you. It was a great time and a great learning experience. And, it was over 2,000 people. Somebody said to me last week, because we did an event in Wyoming.
We will talk about that too. Yes.
So I want you to juxtapose these two events. So we had a 2,200 person event in the Bahamas attached to a casino. And then we had a other event, a Wyoming event with 300 people.
Almost.
And somebody said to me,
on the back
on
of
the Fed, on the doorstep of the Fed meeting. And somebody said to me, the Wyoming event was owners, libertarians, people that are really in the business, want to be in the business 15 years from now. But it felt like we had a lot of renters at the Crypto Bahamas event. But listen, I'll say this. Sam, and people are mad at me for saying this, but I'll say it anyway, because I liked Sam. Obviously, I liked him enough to sell a piece of my business to him. So obviously, I liked him. I trusted him. I was disappointed in Sam in terms of what he did and how he handled himself. But what I will say to you, he was a brilliant guy, and people can, write him off and so on and so forth. There was a reason why 25 venture capitalists gave him north of $1 billion to build that company. And there was a reason why me and my team at SkyBridge felt that we wanted to be in business with him. And so it's astonishing that we sit here today and we see the situation. But and I feel bad for Sam in the following respect that that he needed more oversight in that business. I still can't figure out, maybe you have a better insight on this, how malevolent he actually was. My friend Michael Lewis believes that it wasn't as much malevolence as it was lack of moral clarity and lack of oversight. That's a hard thing to say to people that had lost money there or had their money trapped. It turns out, though, that if you got your money there, you got your money back with interest, or you're in the process of getting it back. But that was a very sad, very sordid situation for me, frankly. And but here's the thing I would tell people: operate with integrity, operate without leverage in the industry, and you can survive it. And you can survive good and bad. I've been, I got fired from Goldman. I've been fired from the White House. I did a business deal with Sam Bankman-Fried. I'm a high-profile guy, so all your mistakes are more amplified than your successes, which is totally understandable, not a big deal to me. But what I would say to you, and I would say to the people listening, is if you're just you got to take these risks to get ahead, particularly if you're an entrepreneur. If you make some mistakes and they end up as high-profile as some of the mistakes that I've made, it's okay as long as you're operating with integrity.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. And I mean, hindsight's 2020. Like, had you known, I would argue you probably wouldn't have done or worked with him.
Oh no, of course not. No,
exactly.
I mean, he did something very clever, and I think this is also something worth talking about on your podcast. When there is a financial crime, you have 3 or 4 people that do the crime. Do you understand what I mean? You can't do a financial crime if you've got 50 people. So as an example, if you have your money at SkyBridge, we have a CFO, we have internal auditors, we have our compliance department, we have our general counsel.
There's too many people for you to get
We then have our outside people looking at it. We have an outside accredited accountant. We have law firms. We have bank custodians. And so what happens is if you have 50 if you have 50 or 60 people looking at something, there's always a person of conscience that is going to step in and say, hey, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me. What we learned about Sam, and this is an unfortunate thing that we learned about Sam, he was doing this with a group of 3 or 4 people, all of which pled guilty, by the way. And those people were...
And testified. Some of them testified, some didn't.
Yeah, well, some of them did, but you get the point of what I'm making. I mean, this was a unmitigated disaster. I'm not going to suggest otherwise, but the way you cause a financial crime is you get 3 or 4 people in a room. Bernie Madoff, very famous Ponzi scheme, exposed in 2008. He had 2 or 3 people he was working with.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really run the financial crime with a lot of people. There's always someone that will say, hey, that doesn't work for me.
Yeah. I guess I'm curious, what kept you in the industry after that? Because it was a pretty big burn. And even for people who, didn't work closely to him, like traditional VCs haven't really come back. Mm-hmm. And yet you stayed in the industry more or less.
I mean, listen, I could be wrong. I mean, listen,
I'm glad you're in it. I'm just curious.
I'm just saying that the detractors of Bitcoin
Mm-hmm.
thus far, 14 and a half, 15 years into the Bitcoin experiment, have been proven wrong. Every year, there's a group of people that say Bitcoin's going to zero. But, I believe in the wisdom of crowds. There is madness to crowds, Jackie, where crowds can get too exuberant. Mm-hmm. They can take stocks or valuations too high. They can then crash them. But there's also a wisdom to crowds, which is why I want to live in a democratic form of government, because the marketplace, there's a lot of smart participants that are buying and selling assets in the marketplace. And the marketplace is deemed that Bitcoin currently is worth $1.2 to $1.3 trillion, depending on the day. And so it's 15 years later. The marketplace is telling you that. I don't think I'm smarter than the marketplace. And I think we've done a lot of homework and a lot of research on Bitcoin. And I think we're going to be right on Bitcoin, as well as some of these other tokens like Solana or Ethereum. I even like things like Avalanche and Polkadot, et cetera. My point being that this industry is here to stay.
Right.
And so even though we had a fraud in the industry that was cataclysmic and I was very close to the blast zone, I think it would have been a big mistake to leave the industry. I was with Kyle Salome, the multi-coin
Mm-hmm.
Entrepreneur, who I think is just a terrific guy, and fully disclosed, I'm an investor of his. And we rode Solana from $250
at the
to
peak.
$8. Yeah, to peak. Yep, that was the peak.
To the most recent low. Yeah.
Yeah, November of 2021 was the peak.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I believe it was December. We could look at the charts. I don't have them in front of me, but the December of 2022 into 23 was the low. So we went from 250 to 8. And I was with Anatoly in his office in San Francisco. I think it was at 10 or 12. And we were all still healing from the Sam Bankman-Fried debacle and from the association and what that meant long term. And so I don't know, Solana's probably like 130 or 140 today. So, somebody like Kyle, who had the strength and Tushar to stay in the position, has now been rewarded by that. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a big lesson for investors in that. So it's a great question you're asking. A lot of people get burned and they leave. Now I'm going to really date myself, since we've already established that I'm a fossil. In 2000, the NASDAQ crashed and Amazon went from $90 to $8.
I've read about it. The .com.
The .com bubble.
And bust.
Yeah, you read about it. When you were still in diapers, this happened. But anyway,
not in diapers, but yes, go on.
but anyway, this burnt me, and it burnt a ton of people. And there are people in my generation that swore off investing in technology after that burn.
And how silly would that look today?
And that was a 25-year generational mistake, because Apple, Facebook, Google, all of these companies have led the stock market over the last 25 years. And so having a debacle or having something happen like FTX, I would encourage investors not to overly allow that to foreshadow what they're doing.
Would you compare that bust in the 2000s to what happened in 2022 then with crypto?
A little different, because in crypto we had lots of fraud.
We have a lot of market waves too. Yeah.
Similar in the sense that we were over levered. Mm-hmm. So people were like, okay, this is going to infinity, and so let me maximize the leverage. And then when the bottom fell out, the crash ensued, and that happened in crypto. But I think we had a lot of fraud in the industry. And I'm going to say something that industry participants will be surprised by. I think Gary Gensler is the worst SEC commissioner in the history of the SEC. They're not going to be surprised by that.
A lot of crypto.
But his decision to delay the cash ETF, the spot Bitcoin ETF, which was an incorrect decision pursuant to the law. He lost that court case. But that delay actually did help the industry. Whether we like it or not, it helped the industry because the bottom fell out on Celsius, 3 Arrows. The bottom fell out on FTX, BlockFi. All of this massive leverage and potential fraud was exposed. Imagine if you got the cash ETF approved and you had participants like BlackRock and Fidelity coming in with their selling machines, selling the idea of Bitcoin to their investors.
And then something like that
it would have fortified the base of those frauds. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's just luck on Gensler's part, but it did help. The irony of what I'm saying to you, Jackie, is it did help the industry.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like it at the time, but it certainly did. Now that we sit here in two-thirds of 2024 behind us.
Yeah. I mean, I think the spot Bitcoin ETF came at a fairly appropriate time. I don't know if there's ever like a right time for it to be released. I think it should have been released a while back, like you guys applied for one in 2020.
Yes.
And I think there will always be market conditions that will give, someone like Gary Gensler a reason not to release it. But to your point, yes, it did benefit in the fact that it came after all that, because if it came before and that shakes everything out, wouldn't have been good. But I wanted to talk to you a bit about the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium that Salt hosted last week. Mm-hmm. By the time we air this, it will be last week. How was it? What were the themes? Tell me, what was your biggest takeaway as someone overseeing all these operations and conversations?
So it's interesting. So truth be told, I'm halfway through the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium and say, well, what do I mean by that? Well, because what happens to me when I run a conference, I'm the bride at the wedding, but I'm also the cadaver at the funeral. Okay, so I'm running around like a crazy person and I'm not seeing everything, right?
Yes, that's
and so
true.
now I've got links from my team. It ended on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Today's Tuesday. So I've gone through half of the sessions. And of course, I participated in 2 of the 30 sessions. But here's what I would say. We were gratified by the turnout. We had very high level C-suite people. And I was gratified by the turnout. And if I had to say, based on my observation, what are the 3 things that I got out of it? Number 1, there will be bipartisan, comprehensive legislation for this industry. The czarist authoritarian, the Donald Trump of the SEC, Gary Gensler, will be behind us. Even if he stays in that job, he won't have the power that he's been given, because you're going to have very clear, crystal clear regulatory guidelines brought to you by the United States Congress. So I absolutely believe that. Number 2, the industry is not only here to stay, but I think some of the promise that you'd like to see from the industry is going to start happening. And so I'm going to draw a comparison to Web 1. We had something in Web 1 in 1999 called Web Vans, and it was supposed to be a grocery system where someone ran around and delivered you the groceries. It didn't work. It went bankrupt, but we did pick up DoorDash.
Yeah.
We had another thing called pets.com. It flamed out, but now we have something called Chewy that's doing quite well. And so what ends up happening is, to your point earlier about being early on something, I was early on the ETF. The government wasn't ready for it. They rejected it. And now there are participants that have successful Bitcoin ETFs. We're going to see that payment rail system, that promise that Jack Mallers is talking about from the Lightning Network, or the tokenization that could take place in real world assets on a token chain like Solana, is going to happen. So that's the second thing that finally is emanating. You're going to get the legislation. It's going to happen. And the third thing, which I think is I've gotten wrong. So let me just say how I got it wrong. If you had interviewed me in 2021 and you said, well, where are the institutions? Are they going to be entering the space? I would have said yes. If you said when, I would have said in the next 6 months.
A little bit.
And I got that.
Yeah.
And I got that wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I got that wrong because they were not here.
Yeah.
But they are on the doorstep now. And I'll give a couple of examples. The state of Wyoming is involved heavily. The state of Wisconsin, $150 million in their pension fund allocated to Bitcoin now. Hedge fund managers, you can go to Bloomberg and look at the list of hedge fund managers that own the Bitcoin ETF. I could go on and on and on, but there's lots of activity on the institutional side. There are sovereign wealth funds that are not going to tell you, they're not going to come on your podcast and say, hey, Jackie, we're buying Bitcoin right now. But there are sovereign wealth funds that are allocating to Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. So it is happening. Something that I would have said to you in 2021, hey, by the middle of 2022, you're going to have tons of institutional investors. Got it wrong. So it's taking longer. It's almost like building a house, Jackie. Okay, the contractor comes in,
they're slow.
promises the delivery of the house on a certain date, and 2 years later you get the house. I mean, it takes longer than we would like it to. But those are the three things I got out of the event, and I had the time and the opportunity to speak with Senator Tim Scott, and Cynthia Loomis, as well as the governor. Governor Gordon from Wyoming, and you have a group of public servants that are locked into making this happen for people. So I like those things.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about the policy bit in a second, but to continue the conversation on institutions, why now? And then also, is it based off your conversations solely a focus on Bitcoin, or are they interested in other aspects and other currencies, tokenization, what have you? This podcast is sponsored by Galaxy. If you're immersed in the world of Web3, Galaxy is a name you need to know. As a decentralized super app with an impressive 21 million users boasting over 100 million monthly transactions, Galaxy is elevating its impact with Gravity, the magnet chain for Web3. Gravity is designed for full chain abstraction, zero knowledge proof based privacy, and rapid transaction speeds, all coming together to offer an unparalleled user experience. Gravity opens the door for developers to effortlessly build on the largest on-chain distribution platform, and for users, it promises an even smoother, more secure journey through Web3. It's not about being on-chain, it's about being on the right chain every single time. Galaxy is on a mission to onboard the world to Web3, and Gravity is the magnetic force that will propel the vision forward. Ready to launch your Web3 journey? Build the future on Gravity. Visit gravity.xyz for more information.
Good question. I'm going to try to think about the answer to that. The simplistic answer and the most obvious answer is that because the SEC approved both a Bitcoin and a Ethereum cash spot ETF, that's opening the door. But I think there's something else going on. I think that these very big money managers and very big venture capitalists are recognizing that there's a transition happening in the industry. The industry has strained out some bad actors, FTX being one of them, and good actors like Kraken and Coinbase are rising to lead the industry. And a result of which I think there's more institutional comfort that these people are providing best practices similar to what you would expect from a large commercial bank. So I think that's the best answer I can give you based on my observation.
Okay. And what are they interested in buying? Is it spot cash Bitcoin ETF? I've never heard the cash part of it, but it makes sense.
Well, you see, that's old school. I should call it spot, but like there's a cash market and there's a futures market, right? But
yes.
Anyway, so
I used to cover futures. That was what I did.
It's an old term. Rub it in, girl. Keep rubbing it in.
It's not intentional. Okay,
somebody please pass the salt for my eyeball. Pass
for
me
the wounds. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to
open wounds. Go ahead. Keep going.
I love all audiences. So, okay, you're dodging my question though. Are they interested in Bitcoin? Are they interested in other cryptocurrencies too?
Yeah, no, I think it's Bitcoin for now. Yeah, I don't want to dodge the question. I think it's Bitcoin for now, but I think it's ecosystems. Like if you said to me, PayPal, yes, there's a MicroStrategy. What about Coinbase? I think it's the tools that are going into the industry. The institutional investors are investing in as well. Yes, but will people buy Ethereum? Yes. Will they end up buying Solana? I do believe that. I mean, Solana's ETF will probably get delayed, but it doesn't deserve to be, and it'll eventually have one.
Do you think that's where the limit on ETFs would be capped on those 3 cryptocurrencies?
It's a good question. I don't know, but I feel that in the current environment, yes. If this regime at the SEC stays in place, then for the foreseeable future, yes.
And aside from just like buying cryptocurrencies, what do financial institutions and investors in that space want? Is it tokenization, real world assets, just DeFi? What does it look like to them?
So I think people want 3 things, okay? And so the first thing would be lower cost with safety. And so said differently, we're spending about $7 trillion a year globally on transaction verification. So that's MasterCard, Visa, American Express, right? I'm going to the store. I'm going to pay you. Here's the card that says that I will, and then that guarantor is Visa, and we both get hit for 3.5% on that, right? Or I'm wiring money to you, so I have a corresponding bank send you the money.
Fees,
They're going to charge me a wiring fee. Maybe I have enough assets where they won't, but by and large, most people are underbanked, and so they get charged a wiring fee. And so if you go through the list of things, there's $7 trillion worth of fee activity associated with us not liking and not trusting each other, where we need a third party to verify our transactions. But if you have this wonderful mechanism called the blockchain, where you have a series of nodes, thousands of them, tens of thousands of them, that can verify the transaction for you, and it's fully safe and not hackable, that's a huge cost savings for a society. When I was a kid and I was walking around in Rome, if I wanted to call my parents, I'd had to wait in line, go to the post office, tell them I needed a 5-minute phone call. They say, okay, that's great. That's $15 US, $3 a minute. Okay. I talked to my mom. Now I can go to any cafe in Rome, ask them for their Wi-Fi, and make that call wirelessly for no dollars with unlimited minutes, right? When I bought my first HD television, I think it was 2004, it was $9,000. Okay. I'm sitting here with a television that's $600.
Right.
That's smart television. I can stream off of it. I've got 4K presentation, which is 4 times improved, or almost 4 times improved from the 1080p, right? And so that's where we're going. And so I think if you said to me, I'm going to be able to go to a restaurant and avoid the 3.5%, and everyone's going to be happy, and that's going to be my phone. I go to the waiter and say, excuse me, what's your wallet? And they tell me what it is, and I give them the money, avoid the 3.5%. Think of the cost savings. So I think that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is for Bitcoin specifically, I think Bitcoin checks all the boxes of what historically we view stores of value. It's immutable, can't be recreated, it's identifiable, it's fully distributed and transparent. It's a technology, but it's a very tight ledger. And banks hate it when I say this, but let's just say the obvious. They're large databases, banks. That's what they are. We see them differently in our minds. We see them as a fortress for our money. But they're really just large databases. You have your account. There's digits in your account. There's digits in my account. Let's say I want to buy a car. I move the digits from my account over to the car dealer. They drop off a car. It's just a large database, right? And so Bitcoin is a fully distributed, transparent database. And so when somebody says to me, well, Bitcoin's worthless, well, is your bank worthless? No, my bank's not worthless. Oh, well, Bitcoin's not worthless.
Yeah. We would hope
because it's a database, right? And then eventually, when they figure all this out and it will be regulated, you'll be able to get yield off your Bitcoin. They were doing that unsuccessfully with BlockFi and things like that. I think you can still do it in limited capacities today, but there's some forms of, but you know what I mean. I'm talking
like
about
on a regulated stance where institutions can actually.
I'm talking about, we're
or
talking
the everyday
about
person. Yeah.
We're talking about 121, you might be able to custody your Bitcoin at a big commercial bank and you might be able to earn yield off of it at some point. It's possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's just a matter of time on that front. And it's all just about like making things more accessible and easy to use and also cheaper. Like you said, I also remember when things were like astronomically expensive when it came to TVs or cell phones or even like your cell phone bills, like it would cost so much money just to search something on the internet. But I digress. You brought up before at the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium how you had representatives from Wyoming, Wisconsin, and other legal entities, I guess is a short way to put it, or government entities. What were the conversations there? Policy and regulation is a massive topic right now across the crypto space in the past like 18 to 24 months. We've talked a little bit about the SEC. What is your takeaway from that? And then we could kind of talk about like your outlook.
Question. Well, just to be clear, there was nobody from Wisconsin. I was just pointing out Wisconsin made a allocation. There was really people there from Wyoming, and there was people from the U.S. Senate,
Correction.
And there were other regulators, mostly state regulators from Wyoming. But Wyoming, I think, has led the way in the blockchain space. I think their practices are going to be exported into other states, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to do the conference in that venue. But I think. And I'll say to you what Chuck Schumer has said, that he wants and he's willing to work towards comprehensive legislation for the industry. So that would include stablecoin legislation. It would include great clarity about how companies like Kraken or Coinbase can operate successfully inside the United States. I think they have to address Operation Choke Point 2.0. I think they have to provide clarity to the Fed about what the government is willing to bank in the United States related to cryptocurrency. And so, the people in my industry do feel it. And I think, I think one of the problems, since we brought up Sam earlier, when I think about the regulatory problem that we faced in the Biden administration, I do think it's Sam Bankman-Fried related. And so just hear me out for a second. I believe that Elizabeth Warren was close to Sam and Sam's parents, and Gary Gensler met with him many times. It turned out that Sam was doing something very fraudulent, and in order to eclipse the closeness that he had to those two people, they went on a regulatory jihad against the entire industry. So it was a way for them to obfuscate how close they were to giving him regulatory authority, potentially regulatory licenses. And so they swung the pendulum against good actors like Coinbase. And I think that's unfortunate, but I think that's what happens in our politics now. They were trying to take the spotlight away from themselves in terms of what their interactivity was with Sam.
Yeah, because essentially he made them look stupid for not spotting that when it was right under their nose. And so now in order to recompense that or to, make up for that or overcompensate for that, they went hard at the industry unfairly. So what's your perspective on all this? I know you have a politics themed podcast and you also, have a hand within the industry. You have close relationships with these people. Do you think America is moving in the right direction when it comes to placing policy on the crypto industry and regulating it?
So I do, and I think it's important for people to take a step back and think long term. The Winklevosses are upset with the Democrats, and so they've given a lot of money to Donald Trump, and they're out on Twitter or X supporting Donald Trump. There are other players that are probably less nuanced than the Winklevoss twins that are more aggressive that are speaking Republican only. I think that's dangerous. I want the industry to be bipartisan. I want there to be committed bipartisanship to the regulatory process. I find that when things are bipartisan, you take the politics out of it. Okay, should we have the cryptocurrency blockchain the industry in the United States? And I believe the answer to that is yes. It'll help us maintain our financial services leadership. Just talk about stable coins for a second. Tether has eclipsed both Japan and Germany in terms of the size of the ownership of the U.S. treasuries that they own in the Tether portfolio. So just imagine if you get great stablecoin legislation, it actually strengthens the U.S. dollar. It doesn't take away from the U.S. dollar or threaten the U.S. dollar. And so for these reasons, I want it to be bipartisan. And so I do think we're going to get there. And so you're asking me a good political question. I've worked on, this has been reported, so I'll share it with you. I've been to 2 White House staff-related meetings, and I've been with elected officials from both the Democrats and the Republicans on this. And who's joined me at those meetings? Mark Cuban, Mike Novogratz, Brad Garlinghouse from Ripple. And these are super smart, very sophisticated people who want bipartisan commitment to good legislation to help out the industry. So I think it'd be a huge danger, by the way, if we make this a partisan issue, because if it becomes a Donald Trump only issue, then there'll be Democrats that won't support it just because he is supporting it, and vice versa. So we have to be very careful of that now, and because of the tenuousness of our tribal politics.
Do you think that's where it's headed, though? Because, I see it on the crypto Twitter sphere every day that because Donald Trump has come out in favor of crypto, now, like you said, a lot of people are rushing towards, one side opposed to the other. And then there isn't as much conversation maybe on the presidential level on crypto. Maybe you could tell me differently.
I can't tell you differently yet. I think based on guidance that I've been given from Democrats that it will be bipartisan. If you're watching crypto Twitter or crypto X or whatever we call it now, it doesn't feel that way. And so I understand the emotion out there, and I understand where things are, but I would just point out to everybody 2.5, 3 years ago, maybe a little longer than that, 4 years ago, Donald Trump hated Bitcoin.
Right.
And Donald Trump was aggressively tweeting on Twitter, then known as Twitter, negative stuff about Bitcoin. Now he's claiming that he's got a 180 and he's had a transformation. He's been orange pilled. And I'll take him at his word, although his word has been specious at times. Flip side is the Warren Gensler regime, is that fading? Now, if you listen to Chuck Schumer, it is, and I think the Harris campaign team and the forces behind the economic ideas and economic policy for the Harris campaign, they have to eventually articulate that. So she hasn't done that yet. And so until she does, I can't vouch for them on it, but I can tell you that I've had conversations with people in the orbit that I think are constructive and going in the right direction. But listen, people are angry. They have a right to be angry. They've been unfairly gone after. We've had regulation by enforcement. We've had occupation, or whatever it's called, Operation Choke Point 2.0. There's a lot of nasty things, Jackie, that are happening that are arbitrary and czar-like and Soviet-like. What I would say, the great irony is here, these guys are going after Trump and saying that he's a threat to the democracy. Okay, but you've got Gensler, who is a Soviet-style czar, who is arbitrary and capricious with our laws in terms of how he's running the oversight of the cryptocurrency industry. And I think he's doing that because he's trying to hide how close he was to Sam Bankman-Fried.
I mean, it's unlikely that Gary Gensler will be the chairman for the next term, is what I've heard. I don't know if you agree with that.
I'm Catholic. So when I say the rosary, one of the prayers is, please God, get rid of Gary Gensler. Help us figure out a way to get rid of him. He's like one of the words. For the crypto industry, I hope your prayers come true. I'd like to have my prayers answered, Jackie.
Yes. Well, no,
the guy's been a disaster.
Yeah. No, 100%. You want it to be bipartisan. You want it to exist in between everything. And I think that would be the most ideal outcome. But what would it really take for that to happen? I feel like it's optimistic thinking, and I like being optimistic. So I'm willing to hear you out on what it would take for both sides to kind of not politicize it.
My senators are Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand. And they're telling me in face-to-face meetings, and you and I are meeting virtually, but we're face-to-face. They're telling me in face-to-face meetings that they want this to be bipartisan. And they're telling me in face-to-face meetings that they're going to attempt to get legislation done by the end of the year. So that either means before the election or in the lame duck session right after the election. And so I'm going to take them at their word, and I'm going to hope that happens. And if that happens and you invite me back on your podcast, we'll be saying, okay, at least we've got that up behind us.
Right.
But here's something I'll say to you in drawing an analogy. 15 or so years ago, Uber was this exciting new sharing economy app and sharing economy idea. But the taxi authorities didn't want it. The taxi commissions at the different urban centers were like NFW. The mayors didn't want it. The state and city legislators and council people, they did not want it. And they fought it aggressively. But you know who wanted it? The people. The people wanted it. And so ultimately, in a democracy like this, the people won out. And so the people said, okay, I can't fight this anymore. And you tell me, I don't know the number, honestly. So, Mike Novogratz tells me it's 85 million people in this country own cryptocurrencies. I think Coinbase said 50. I don't know the number. Mm-hmm. And some of it is on a USB in somebody's pocket. So there you can't even track the number. But let's say there's 50-ish million people that own cryptocurrency. That's enough to make it a political movement. You know, if Vice President Harris loses the election and you tell me there are 50 million people that are cryptocurrency holders, and you're telling me that 5% of them are single issue voters. So it's 2.5 million people. They want to vote for somebody that's pro crypto. Okay. You don't think that could influence or impact the election? I mean, if she loses, we could be doing an autopsy of that loss and saying, wow, it was a huge mistake not to have a positive approach to the cryptocurrency industry and to those people that own those assets. So we'll see. You know, they believe, some of them, well, it's a small number of people, has no impact, and we're on a jihad related to money laundering and blah, blah. But I don't think it's that, because we know that the biggest money laundering vehicle in global history is the US dollar. We know that. So, you know, we can pretend otherwise. But I think this is more related to, we got burned by Sam, and we now need to shove it up the industry's, the yin yang of the industry, because we need to obfuscate from the glare and the microscopic spotlight that could be drawn on us not seeing that fraud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the industry is much bigger than that. You and I know that as well. So I think it's a matter of time and moving forward and going on.
I think it's small thinking. So, so I'm hopeful. I'm an optimist. You know, what did Brian Armstrong say on Twitter the other day? Optimism is like a requirement. I think, it's a requirement. It's a requirement in our industry to be optimistic.
Yeah, I agree. Before we move on to wrapping things up, I'm having fun with this. You have a lot of conferences. You spend a lot of time around the world. What is it like in other regions or countries? I know you have SALT in Abu Dhabi. You've had it in Singapore, Tokyo, other places that are not America. So what is the sentiment there towards crypto, and how do you think it kind of...
We had some of the FAR people who are the regulators in Dubai attend our event in Wyoming. And so what I would say about the UAE, and I would applaud them for this, is that they've made their regulation nonpartisan. And maybe that's the benefit of having a ruler as opposed to having a messy democracy. I don't know, but the regulatory powers inside the UAE, it's not a hard left or a hard right political decision. It's like, okay, this is right or wrong for our country. And if it's right for our country, what are we going to do and how are we going to fairly regulate it? And so they've depoliticized the regulatory process in places like the UAE. In London, as an example, it's also different. I think they hurt themselves hard with the Brexit. I think you could look at the economic data. The economy's actually shrunk on real terms, adjusted real terms, since they Brexited. And I think that they're looking for ways to increase their competitive vigor. One of them is having positively biased cryptocurrency regulation. So Singapore is, I think, a little different. I'm there a lot. I'm going to be there for token 2049 next month. And I think what the Singaporeans are saying is they're interested in having it. They need it to be fairly regulated. The regulations there are very restrictive, which I think is good. Listen, in Tokyo, FTX was solvent. That enterprise, that subsidiary, it had to do with the very stringent regulations there. Mt. Gox, that very famous bankruptcy 10 years ago, that that put people on edge, and it caused a tightening of the regulatory process. And so around the world, I think they're approaching it less politically, Jackie, than we are here in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but everything's politicized in the U.S.
Everything's politicized. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's going to be probably for our lifetimes. I mean, it is what it is. But I think that you want to inject as much rationality into the process as possible, particularly when you're dealing with regulation.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you. So I guess, what do you think would be the outcome on the industry with the upcoming election?
Well, I mean, listen, it's going to be a close election. So let's talk about it from both sides. I think if Donald Trump wins, he removes the Gensler regime. Jay Clayton, very close personal friend of mine who attended the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium.
I've interviewed Jay before. Yeah,
former SEC chairman. Yep. Jay and I are quite close. Jay would tell you that they'll probably put in place a 100-day plan where, through executive action and things that they can do from a non-legislative process, that'll calm down the antagonism versus the industry. Okay, so I think that's very beneficial for the industry.
But Jay Clayton also, before he departed, filed suit against Ripple. So it's not like 100%, one way or another.
Okay, and I understand that, and I think what Jay would say, and I don't want to speak for Jay, but I think what Jay would say is, like, I think we're evolving. Our views are evolving as the industry matures, and good actors are put forward and bad actors are behind us. I think this evolvement is helping us. And I think what Jay would say is that the Trump people want pro-Bitcoin, pro-crypto reform and regulatory policy, as well as good legislation. I think it's murkier, again, if we're just being honest, and I'm a supporter of Vice President Harris. I know the danger of Donald Trump, but if she were to take the job, I think people like Schumer and Gillibrand will win over the Warren Gensler group. Now, that's me. I believe that to be the case, but who the hell knows? I don't know. I think you're getting more clarity from the Republicans, and I think that's a dangerous spot to be in for the Democrats. I'm not a Democratic strategist, but if somebody from their campaign called me, I would say, I think you're making a terrible mistake. You should be issuing statements about how you're for growth and innovation and technological advancement, and that the current rubric against the industry has been ill-conceived, and we need to go in a better direction. And I think if you do that, it'll blunt some of the negativity around you guys in this industry.
Yeah, we have a couple months left. Maybe, hopefully they get.
Well, I think the pushback was, we're going to do it after the convention. We need to make sure that our candidate is solidified and she's actually got the nomination. We're going to do it after the convention. We're less than a week after that convention, so let's remain hopeful that they do something positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot up in the air, so I guess we'll have to wait and see. Anthony, before we wrap things up, I like to ask my guests if you could leave us with a piece of advice, something you've carried with you throughout your time in this industry.
Don't take yourself seriously. That's my advice to people is a piece of stoicism that's said in contemporary times by Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks has the best line ever. Relax. None of us are getting out of here alive. And so the point being, don't take yourself that seriously. You're here for a minute. If something goes wrong, big deal, shake it off. And if something goes right, don't get too big for your britches. I think that's the thing. When I have made mistakes in my career or my life, it's been born from ego and pride. I went to the White House because I wanted to work for the American president because it was going to fit a narrative that I had in my head about my self-identity. I have a mentor. He'll remain nameless because I want to protect his name. But I had a mentor that was offered a very big job in the administration, and he felt that it was the wrong thing to do for himself and his family. So even though he was offered the job, he rejected the job and he declined it. He had his ego in the right place. I had my ego in the wrong place. And so if I'm leaving your podcast listeners with any real message here, get your ego under control, get your pride under control. You'll make better decision-making in your career, your family life, and certainly when you're investing. And so those are my messages. But then also when bad things happen, don't live with the regret of it. Just move on. Who gives a shit?
Yeah. No, I agree with you 100%. Anthony, thank you for coming on today. Really enjoyed it.
Good to be with you, Jackie. Thanks for inviting me. It's a great conversation with you. Thank you.
Till next time.